And salutations, young Jubilers, from my office here at San Jose State University. So today's reading assignment is Kendall Walton on photography, and um, it's amazing the things that you find when you go back and look at your bookshelf. And I found this, which is a series of interviews with leading philosophers of art, and one of whom happens to be none other than Kendall Walton himself. So that is a photograph of Kendall Walton. And I'm going to read you an excerpt from this interview where he talks specifically about photography, and hopefully this will help facilitate your understanding of what he's up to in this little article. So Hans Maes is the interviewer who compiled this text, and he asked Walton, in 1984, you wrote a classic paper, Transparent Pictures, in which you argued that photographs are transparent. So when you're looking at a photograph of, say, your grandfather, you argue that you are actually seeing your grandfather. Many people will consider this a very counterintuitive thesis. How do you make it less counterintuitive? And Walton responds, in the first place, I think many people have thought that I was making a claim about the English word seeing, but I've tried to make it clear that that's not the case. In saying that I see my grandfather when I see a photograph of him, I don't care much whether this involves a change in the meaning of the word seeing or not. What I did claim is that there is an important respect in which seeing a photograph of someone is similar to seeing a person face to face, and also similar to seeing a person in a mirror or through a telescope. All of these cases have something in common, and they are all different in the same respect from seeing a painting or a drawing of someone. A very natural way of bringing out this similarity is to use the word seeing. If this means changing the meaning of the word slightly, well, do we change meaning of words slightly all the time when we come to understand new things about our world? And it seems to me that a very natural way of describing this is to say, let's count seeing a photograph of something as another way of seeing that thing, and then not count seeing a painting of someone as seeing that person. Because that's where there's a very important difference. The slippery slope argument is something that makes the notion intuitively plausible to begin with, although I don't think it is something we should rest too much weight on. The argument is this: you see somebody when you are right in front of them. You can also see a person in a mirror or through a telescope. Then why not through closed-circuit TV? Is there any particular reason why we should always draw a sharp line between seeing something in the first several ways and seeing something in the latter ones? And if we go that far, isn't seeing a photograph of something also similar? People will put this by saying that there's a mechanical connection between the viewer and what's being seen in all of these cases. And then Maes asks, and this is where the difference is between photographs and paintings? And Walton says, yes, but we must also remember that people often are the causes that are painted portraits as well. So the difference between paintings and photographs is not that there's a causal relationship between the resulting picture and the object it depicts in one case and not in the other. There's a causal relation in both cases. In the case of a painting, the sitter in front of a painter causes the painter to do certain things. You can describe this presumably in neurological terms, and the result is the finished portrait. Basically, the difference is that the causal relation goes through the painter's intentional attitudes in the case of a painting in the way that it does not in a photograph. Although, for my part, let me just say, I think there is something to be said about intentionality with respect to photographs, but we can talk about that later. Continuing. I have tried to explain elsewhere what exactly this amounts to. We do have to keep in mind, however, and photographers have very often pointed this out, that the nature of photograph results from many decisions that the photographer makes. She chooses where to aim the camera, when to click the shutter, and all kinds of other things. And for me, that's where the intentionality in photography comes from, right? As the great German philosopher Edmund Husserl pointed out, intentionality is the hallmark of consciousness, right? Our thoughts are always directed at something. That's what intentionality means. We intend to do this, and a photographer intends to take a photograph. One last question regarding photography. Maes asks, is this enough to make a photography an art form? And Walton responds, I don't have any particular account of what it is for something to be an art form. And again, we're back to that dilemma that we've seen in this first week of class, right? Defining art turns out to be very difficult. I think it is certainly enough to deflect the worries that some people have had about photography being an art. I don't think there's any good reason to deny that photography is an art. We can think of the photographer as showing us something and in that way affecting our perceptual experience, maybe profoundly, just as if someone points to something and gets you to look over there and then you see it. If that person hadn't pointed it out, you might not have seen it, or you might not have seen certain features of it, but nevertheless, you are seeing the thing yourself. We can think of the photographer, rather than getting in the way of our view of the object, as showing it to us and getting us to see it in a certain kind of way. So I might have a sense of the attitudes of the photographer and what the photographer thought was important. This, on some accounts, is necessary for counting photography as an art, but I am still seeing the object myself. So, Walton has had a long debate with a lot of philosophers, and Roger Scruton is Exhibit A here, who argue that photography isn't a true art because it doesn't represent and things like of that nature. So I'm going to I'm going to scan and then post this entire interview with Walton on our Canvas page. But I want you to think about this. This question of what constitutes an art form and what doesn't, and it's interesting to hear a philosopher, an esthetician of Walton's pedigree say, he doesn't have a general account and he doesn't think one can be provided of what is or what is not an art form. So again, think about that as you're reading the excerpt from Walton today, and I will see you Friday. I think we've all been kind of leaning toward a Friday meeting, so we'll see if we can make that happen.